Hello, welcome to Behavioral Health Case Management, BEH 215. Today we're going to be discussing fostering and managing staff diversity. So before we can manage a staff, we have to recruit and hire that staff. And the goal of recruitment is to produce a large, diverse pool of applicants from whom the best possible individuals can be selected. Hiring the best person for the job is much more complicated than choosing the person with the best academic credentials or the longest work history. In terms of looking at a prospective employee, you have to look at a variety of different issues, including how that person will fit in the culture of the company, as well as what they bring to the job and what you will have to provide them in terms of training. So before you even post an ad, you have to identify what qualities and qualifications are needed by that person who will hold the position. When you are thinking about job postings, you want to really focus on having certain things. You want to have the job title and a brief description of the responsibilities, the major responsibilities. Minimum qualifications required. Is it an associate's degree, a bachelor's, a master's? Do you expect them to have a certain certification? Do you expect them to have a license? There's a lot of items that you have to very specifically look at and say, these are the minimum things that we need. And then most job postings should have a statement of equal opportunity and affirmative action, especially in social services and behavioral health. Optional elements can include information about the organization, such as its mission, the time frame in which applications will be accepted before the hiring process begins. And this way, you're not going to be getting resumes for years after you posted a job because you didn't have an expiration date. And then also an expected date when the position will start. That will also identify for people that we're not hiring until a certain month, so that they're not going to harass you incessantly for the next 3 or 4 months. So a few caveats or warnings. You should create the posting so that 1. You eliminate applications from unqualified applicants as much as possible. There is a group of people out there who literally throw their resume at every single job posting. They may not be qualified, they may not have the credentials, they may not have the licensures. But most people are willing to pick and choose what jobs they apply for. So you want to eliminate as much of that, phishing as possible, where people are just throwing their line out constantly. Number 2, provide just enough information about the company to entice people to apply. You don't want to say, hey, we're a struggling company that just doesn't have enough money to make payroll most weeks. No, people are not going to come and work for you. Number 3, specifically identify how you want applicants to contact you if they have questions or if they can contact you at all. Again, there are some people who will call you every single day, and it will make you insane. So if you leave an email address, if you have a 1-800 number, anything that you provide in that job posting, you expect to get a multitude of data sent to that. And you want to be very judicious about what information you provide. A lot of companies will have an email address, job posting at xyz.com, just because they don't want one individual's email box to get filled with a lot of junk email that they're not going to be able to get through. And then last, you want to maintain evidence of a fair and open search, because you want to be able to say, we're not just hiring our relatives. We're not just hiring people that we know. we want to prove that we're hiring the best possible candidates, especially when grant money is involved. When grant money is involved, you have to demonstrate a fair and equitable hiring system. So, hiring procedures. A lot of large companies have written procedures on the steps a manager needs to take when they are hiring an employee. These policies are generally in place to avoid ethical or legal issues. So here's an example of a hiring procedure. So a person submits the resume or application. Now, why do people have to fill out applications and submit a resume? I hear that a lot. Well, a resume is just a document. An application, on the other hand, is a legal document. So if you lie on your resume, no big whoop. You lie on that application, then you're really actually committing fraud. So a lot of companies will have you fill out that application just to reinforce the idea that if you are lying, they can terminate you for that. Number 2, organization sends confirmation to applicant that they have received the application. So you might get a postcard or an email. Applicant is screened by human resources or a specific employee for suitability for the job. So a first interview. It can be done on the phone, it can be done in person, but this is a very generic interview. Then they inform the applicant that the organization either does not feel that they will be a good fit or that they will be moving forward in the interviewing process. So at this point, you either blew it and you got to move on and look for something else, or it's time to move on to the next interview. Meanwhile, back at the company, references are being checked and any additional information needed from the applicant is being collected. Those applicants who did not have good references are culled from the list. Bye-bye. Interviews are conducted with the remaining applicants, second interviews, sometimes even third or fourth interviews, and then the recommendation to the hiring manager is made of the top applicants. And there's usually a, first choice, second choice, third choice, but generally the first choice or the second choice are usually the people who get the job. Now, some other issues that you have in hiring includes the involvement of others. Although final approval to hire is usually with the director, input from other members of a team can influence the decision to hire an individual. The challenge is to determine whose input is valuable and how should their input be used. So, for example, you are hiring a new counselor. One of the board of trustees at your nonprofit has a nephew who has just graduated with a degree in counseling. He doesn't have a lot of practical experience, but he does have the right academic credentials. Additionally, the board member has been very supportive of your leadership, and you may undermine your relationship if you choose not to hire their nephew. In some cases, you have seen managers fired for not hiring board members' family. So this is one of those situations that gets very complicated because you're not hiring somebody off the street who is not qualified. I mean, the guy is technically qualified academically. He just doesn't have as much experience as you would like. On the other hand, if you don't hire him, you might be out on the street with the nephew looking for a job. So there are ethical and legal issues that go so far beyond what you learn in terms of the day-to-day running of a business. Another issue is if your supervisor should have the right to overrule your hiring choices. In many companies, your supervisor does have the final say on who is hired. So creating a collaborative hiring process is essential to ensure the best decision for the organization. If you have a candidate that you think is just top-notch, and your supervisor is not crazy about them, you're going to have to not just convince your supervisor of this, you're going to have to really sell this candidate. Not just in the sense of, convincing them that they're the right candidate, but really selling. And that's why it's important to collaborate with your supervisors and not just work with them. Other issues include available compensation. One of the major issues in any hiring decision is what you're going to pay the applicant. Nonprofits and behavioral health environments often have tight budgets and consequently have constraints as far as compensation. We're not talking about people who work for big banks or who work as NFL football stars. We are talking about people who are dedicated to helping work with people. And sadly, there's not as much money to go around as compared to a, major league baseball team or football league. So as the person who is doing the hiring, it is important to be aware of what the marketplace pays. A website, and this is a great website, cannot stress this website enough, is www.bls.gov, and that stands for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, provides hiring managers with appropriate salary ranges for positions, even down to where in the country. So for example, if you live in New York, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, even somewhere like near San Francisco, Los Angeles, you're going to be paying a lot more to somebody than if you are living in a town in the Midwest, like Indianapolis, or somewhere in Kansas, or somewhere in Alabama, down south, Arkansas. The cost of living is just cheaper in certain places. So you have to know what the going rate is by the place the people are going to be working. Also, there are other ways to compensate a prospective employee. So for example, flexible work hours. This is great for working moms and dads. So if they can't make it to work till 9 because they have to get their kids on the school bus, that's a great option to give people. Professional autonomy, giving them independence. People don't like managers breathing down their neck all the time. So giving them some autonomy is a wonderful way of giving them a non-cash value benefit. Professional travel. Young people just graduating from college, having, single, no family, they love to travel. Give them an opportunity to travel for various and sundry business opportunities. Somebody who's 40 with 3 kids, a husband, they're not going to be as interested in traveling because they have a family and they're committed to being at home. Whereas somebody who's 23 or 25, they may be excited to travel. Medical and dental insurance, also very important these days. Generous 401k or 403b contributions. We as a society have to plan for our retirement. And if you have the opportunity to help them put more money away for retirement, that's going to be a good option. And then finally, educational reimbursement. And this is a wonderful option, especially in the health services and behavioral health field. So you have somebody who has a bachelor's or an associate's degree, they come work for you, and you help pay for their next level of degree. That way, they are committed to staying with you for X number of years, and you are helping them improve themselves. So these kind of benefits are very important. So when you look at salary, that's only part of the equation. Then we have licensure and accreditation requirements. Depending on the job title, the hiring manager may need prospective applicants to have specific licenses or accreditations. For example, social workers must pass state licensing exams, and addiction counselors are often required to have a certification. So, for example, certified addictions treatment counselors have 5 levels of addiction, 5 levels of certification to go through. Additionally, institutions may be required to have specific accreditations, and these accreditations standardize the professional credentials that are required. So if there is an accreditation that requires all the employees to have a certain level of academic completion, that becomes a very important part of that as well. Finally, organized labor. This is a big one. And in institutions where employees are unionized, the labor union may dictate who can be hired and under what conditions. Salary and benefits are subject to the union contract that is currently in effect between the organization and the labor union. So if you are working with nurses, they are unionized. If you're working with educators, often they are unionized. Unions often rely on seniority for promotions, so even hiring from within can be more complicated in an institution with organized labor. It's important to understand this because you don't always have the opportunity to hire who you want and when you want if you're working with a unionized group of employees. Then you have legal requirements. Since the 1960s, a variety of laws have been implemented to ensure hiring decisions are not discriminatory. These are good things. So we have the Equal Pay Act of 1963, and this prevents discrimination based on gender. It does not, however, guarantee equal pay, though. I know it says equal pay, but it just prevents discrimination based on gender. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 requires companies of 15 or more to justify hiring criteria. Executive Order 11375 in 1978 developed the concept of affirmative action, and we'll talk about that in a lot more detail in a few minutes. Section 402 of the Vietnam-era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act of 1974 encouraged employers to hire veterans and to give veterans extra credit on civil service exams. And then Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, of 1990 requires all programs, services, and activities within organizations be accessible to all employees with reasonable accommodation. So that word reasonable is bold for a reason. If you want to be a surgeon and you're blind, what reasonable accommodation can be made? Really not much. So you have to use that word reasonable as the benchmark of decision making. A disabled person can be hired if reasonable accommodations can be made. So for example, if someone has lost their ability to walk and are in a wheelchair, can they still work as a counselor? Absolutely. So when we are looking at these legal requirements, we begin to understand that hiring is a much more complicated endeavor than just saying, hey, you're hired. So let's get back to affirmative action. This is a very controversial situation that's still controversial to this day, and it's a shame because affirmative action has really helped minorities move up in society, because the presumption is everyone is treated equally under the law, and anyone who is not a white male Protestant can tell you that we are not, and that there are institutional racism, sexism, genderism all across the board. So affirmative action tries to keep things more fair. So it is an action or policy favoring those who have historically suffered from institutionalized discrimination, especially in relation to employment or education. Affirmative action requires that organizations that receive directly or even indirectly some federal sources of funding take steps to correct employment inequities that exist. Again, this is not every single company. These are companies that receive federal funding or indirectly receive federal funding. It requires the development and implementation of a plan to grant preferential treatment in hiring and other personnel actions to women, people of color, and other groups in order to increase their representation in an organization. Affirmative action guidelines require an applicant to be fully qualified, but they don't have to be the best qualified. So again, this is a controversial idea, and depending on what side of the balance you stand on, it's either something that's very beneficial. A Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Sotomayor, says it was the best thing that ever happened for her. It allowed her to become incredibly successful, whereas other people like Dr. Ben Carson has said that it's not a benefit and that it will only keep African Americans reliant on the government. So your opinion may vary. So let's talk about the various people who work within a human services organization. First, we have our professionals. These are the employees with extensive formal educational preparation who have acquired specialized knowledge and credentials. Their work is considered highly skilled. Then we have pre-professionals. These are the employees who are still engaged in their formal education and who are working towards their credentials. They complete work under the supervision of the professionals until they complete their education and earn their own credentials. Then we have paraprofessionals. These are employees who have undergone specialized education and training that has prepared them to perform a limited number of tasks. They generally do not aspire to become professionals. So they can do certain tasks, but they are not committed to spending half their life in college. Then we have Indigenous Non Professionals. This means employees who do not have the education or training, but have certain life experiences or cultural identification that makes them especially well suited to relate to certain clients and their problems. Support staff, and again, most companies have these, employees who provide clerical, custodial, maintenance support. They do not provide direct service to clients. Unfortunately, when budgets get tight, these are the employees who are often laid off first. Then lastly, we have our volunteers, and depending upon their education, experience, background, and willingness, volunteers provide service and support without pay. So many of us have gone to the hospital and we go to the front desk and there's a person sitting at the front desk with a little name tag and it says volunteer, and they direct us to our loved one's room. So something like that. So let's talk about professionals and role strain, because this is a big issue in the field. Professionals are expected to have a high level of commitment to their clients and their welfare. It is expected that professionals need the least amount of supervision. However, they tend to be the most critical of management because their focus is on clients and not on the day-to-day running of the organization. Additionally, the supervisor may not completely understand the demands made on the professional's time, so their expectations are inconsistent with the agenda the professional has. So operations, which is the day-to-day running of the organization, and what the professional or the highly skilled counselor has to do are not always consistent. And as a consequence, professionals often experience role strain due to this discrepancy between client role expectations and the professional's perception of their roles. Clients may be seeking support that the professional perceives as enabling their problems. So, for example, you have someone who has an addiction issue and they perceive themselves, this is the client, that if they can get just a little bit of drugs, that'll help them feel better, and then they can work on their sobriety. The professional, on the other hand, says, no, you can't get a little bit of drugs to feel better and then work on your sobriety. Meanwhile, the operations manager is saying, why are you spending so much time with that client? Because you're supposed to only spend 48 minutes. So additionally, role strain may occur when professionals are made to feel that their position is less important than other fields. So for example, a medical doctor may impose their opinion on how a client should be handled when the behavioral health professional has a different plan. So again, if a behavioral health person believes that somebody who is dealing with anxiety should work on behavior modification to help them manage their anxiety, and the medical professional just says give them some benzodiazepines like Valium or Xanax, that discrepancy could cause role strain, because it's easier to pop a pill than to try and work on the core issues of why a person is dealing with anxiety. Pre-professionals are usually not paid for their work, but instead receive college credit. However, the workload can be just as heavy for them as for the professionals. Their outsider perspective can be helpful and also very threatening to managers who are not confident in their knowledge. So as a manager, you might deal with interns who are learning the cutting edge elements of the field. And you've been a manager for 20 years and you haven't been in school for a long time, and it could be threatening. Paraprofessionals are also called technicians or case aides. They're used as a cost-saving measure to free up time for the professionals. Paraprofessionals may take histories, complete billings, speak with insurance companies, transport clients, and manage childcare. So, there's a vast level of managing different levels of employees when one is looking at managing a behavioral health or social services environment. And then we have our Indigenous Non Professionals. Because they relate to certain clients, it is believed that they may be better able to communicate with them and will be more readily accepted and trusted by them than professionals who have lived very different lives. Indigenous non-professionals who have had similar problems such as family violence, anger management issues, mental illness, substance abuse, understand and appreciate the difficult process of overcoming them. They know what it's like. So, when you think about people who go to AA meetings or NA, Narcotics Anonymous meetings, that's really a bunch of Indigenous non-professionals who get together to support one another, because they've all been at that rock bottom where they allowed substance abuse to get in the way of their lives functioning. Essentially, these Indigenous non-professionals serve as a role model while providing valuable support to those who are still struggling. Volunteers are a great option. They free up paid staff to focus on other tasks. They provide credibility within the community because, if somebody walks in off the street and they see someone they know from the neighborhood, that automatically brings credibility to the organization. And it breaks down those communication barriers. They offer unhurried, one-on-one caring and attention. These are the folks who will chit-chat with you at the front desk. And they provide community input. They'll tell the operations manager how the community feels about the organization. Now, there's also potential problems. Unpaid labor, hard to supervise. They're not being paid, so they don't feel like they have to follow any specific rules. Volunteers often have difficulty understanding the demands of confidentiality and boundaries. When you're dealing with mental health patients, with addictions patients, with patients who have health services issues, those confidentiality issues are so paramount. And more importantly, maintaining boundaries, because people with issues often will glom onto their counselor or the person who's helping them. Well, they will also glom onto the volunteer, and that volunteer hasn't learned how to create those boundaries, and they will get sucked in, and that person becomes almost like a parasite to the volunteer. Also, a lot of time volunteers, after they've been working there for a few months, might say, hey, I can do this, and they try to counsel clients without any training. And that is a recipe for disaster. So, how do you begin a volunteer program? You have to ask yourself a few questions. Number one, are there tasks that lend themselves well to the needs and interest of volunteers? Are these tasks defined? Will it threaten paid staff members? Are the volunteers just welcoming people? Are they putting out mailers? Are they handing out cards at a community event? How will the paid staff feel about the volunteers? Will they be happy that somebody's there to stuff envelopes? Is there someone on staff who would be a good coordinator for the volunteers? You need someone who's going to be friendly, who's going to be good at managing people. Are they willing to share their knowledge and time? Or are they going to be annoyed and pissed off? And that's not going to be conducive to a volunteer program. Can the organization tolerate the increased uncertainty and different perspectives that volunteers are likely to bring? Volunteers love to tell you, well, at my other job, this is how we do it. And sometimes that's beneficial because sometimes they have good ideas, but other times, not so much. Volunteers should be brought in incrementally. Start with 2, see how the staff reacts, and then build the program from there. One of the most important aspects of any management position is managing diversity. There are 2 kinds of diversity. The primary form of diversity are those that cannot be changed. They do not reflect a choice on the part of the individual. This includes age, ethnicity, race, physical ability or disability, and sexual orientation. Secondary forms of diversity reflect, more or less, choices that an individual has made, such as their marital status, parental status, their religious affiliation. Managers should continually improve their cultural knowledge, which means becoming familiar with the values, beliefs, history, customs, and behaviors of groups. For example, if you work in an area with a large Jewish or Muslim population, you should make an effort to know when their major holidays are. Cultural awareness will help develop your understanding of others, and it results in openness and flexibility. Being culturally sensitive means that a person understands that differences exist, and that they are neither better nor worse than anyone else's culture. Culture is fascinating, and whether you are someone from a European background, an African background, an Asian background, a South American background, culture is going to be unique, and it's going to tell you about the person and where they come from. And it is something that you can learn so much about a people from. When a manager moves beyond cultural awareness, they achieve cultural competency. A manager with cultural competency employs a congruent set of behaviors, skills, attitudes, and policies that enable the organization and its diverse staff members to work together effectively. On an organizational level, it is important to assess policies, structures, and procedures to ensure that they are consistent with cultural systems. So you have to look at the organization in which you work and say, are we doing anything that negates the cultural expectations of the people we serve? In diverse organizations, some staff members may label cultural differences as unprofessional, which is a polite way of criticizing someone's culture. Some people are ethnocentric, and they believe their culture is superior to all others. So, for example, Muslim women will oftentimes wear a scarf over their hair, and this is part of their belief system. This is not a bad thing. This is part of their culture, in the same way that when you walk down the street, about 50% of the white guys who are in their 20s are probably wearing baseball caps on any given Saturday. It does not mean that it is a bad or a good thing. It is part of their culture. Now, the reality is, one does it for their religion, one does it because it is part of the cultural status of growing up in this country. It is not a reflection of a negative or a positive. It's just the way it is. And we have to accept that and move forward and not think it's a bad thing. Now, the other issue is managers who are minorities. The demographic characteristics of a manager influence his or her capacity to be a manager. In organizations, it does make a difference whether the manager is male or female, straight or gay, younger or older, if they have a disability, or if they are a certain race or religion. It shouldn't matter, but it does. And the key, though, is it can be a benefit or a liability, depending on the employee's perspective, but over time, a manager who is a good manager will win over all the employees through their hard work, intelligence, and ability to do a great job. The picture on the right-hand side is Condoleezza Rice, who was the Secretary of State under George W. Bush. Now, African American, PhD, classical concert pianist. This woman is one of the most accomplished women in the United States. And yet, so many people criticized her for so many different things. But in retrospect, and remember, hindsight is always 20/20, people look back on her as being a very good Secretary of State because she worked hard, she was very intelligent, and she did what she had to do working under a very difficult situation. So, the reality is you can criticize a person for the color of their skin or who they date or what their religion is, but a good manager is a good manager. How about if clients can't look beyond cultural differences to see the knowledgeable individual who wants to help them? What if the client doesn't want to work with someone who's African American or gay or lesbian or male or female? Unfortunately, people are allowed to be insensitive and prejudiced. As the service provider, we cannot dictate who provides them with the help they want. The manager has a responsibility to do what is necessary to ensure that the client receives the best possible services in a way that maximizes the likelihood that the client can benefit from them. The reality in all of this is that as the service provider, we have to create an environment where the client will benefit. And if the client cannot work with a particular gender, religious person, or ethnicity, they will not benefit. For better or for worse, that's just the reality. Discrimination, when defined in a neutral way, is the activity of recognizing differences. However, in the real world, we see positive discrimination, such as women with bigger breasts tend to get more attention from men, and negative discrimination. Black male teens are often seen as thugs. Prejudice is defined as interpersonal hostility that is directed against individuals based on their membership in a minority group. It relates to a negative feeling or attitude about people based on a characteristic they share with others in a group, and it's an emotional concept. So, you may be prejudiced against Muslims because you watch the news at night and you see ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any number of groups. You could be prejudiced against, those good old rednecks who like to drag black people behind their pickup truck down in Texas. We have an emotional reaction. On the other hand, there are stereotypes. And these are defined as standardized, overgeneralized mental pictures representing a judgment based on a person's perceived group membership. It fails to recognize individual differences. So, for example, all women are bad drivers. Danica Patrick might disagree. This is a cognitive concept. So we think about this. We have said, okay, we look at a person, we see them, we categorize them, and we associate the stereotype. Ooh, they're Asian, they must be good at math. Or, oh, they're a white guy, they must be a jerk. Stereotypes are not true. They may be true for 1 out of 100 people. Doesn't mean that they're true for everyone. So here are some common negative stereotypes. A young woman as a manager doesn't need the job. As soon as she gets pregnant, she'll leave. The manager who is in a wheelchair only got the job to meet affirmative action requirements. The manager who is a middle-aged white guy got the job through the old boy network. The manager, a young black man, can't handle the pressure of the job. The manager, a beautiful woman, is dumb and was hired for her appearance. The manager, a Southern man, is racist and conservative. A manager who is a gay man is only concerned with issues affecting the LGBTQ community. The manager who is retired military is insensitive and rigid. The manager, a Native American, has a drinking problem. These are ridiculous stereotypes to apply to one specific person. And that's the whole point of a stereotype. It's ridiculous. You know, I have met plenty of Asian people who are not good in math. I have met plenty of Southern people who are not racist and not conservative. And I have met many beautiful people who are not dumb. So we have to regard stereotypes as the joke that they are. Now there are, of course, some positive stereotypes. And again, they're no more accurate than the negative ones. So an older manager may be assumed to be more knowledgeable and experienced. Ex-military manager might be expected to be a good leader. The Native American woman who is promoted to management may be perceived as someone especially strong to have beaten the odds to succeed. Ultimately, stereotypes have very little basis in reality. It's a shortcut. It's more important to focus on a person's philosophy of management, their style of management, and their strengths and weaknesses of their management operations. So, we're going to end on Goldner's Locals and Cosmopolitans. Sounds like a cocktail. Alvin Goldner is a researcher who studied staff members. He divided them into two groups. A local owns primary loyalty to the organization. Their primary reference group is their immediate supervisor on the organizational chart. They have a relatively low commitment to the skills of their discipline, and they are eager to move up the ladder in the company in which they work. A cosmopolitan, on the other hand, their primary loyalty is to their profession and to its values. They feel a kinship with their fellow professionals, not their supervisor, and they are highly committed to their field and wish to maintain their position so they can continue to practice in the field they trained for. So they don't want to be promoted to management. They want to stick with the job they were trained to do. According to Goldner, ideally the best employee is a mix of both a local and a cosmopolitan, someone who's flexible. So, that's it for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to text or email me. If you're not in my class, please leave me a comment and I will respond as soon as I can. Thank you very much and have a fabulous day.